Welcome to my lecture here on improving your lighting in Revit. And there are a couple of things that I'm going to talk about. Some are kind of more process oriented, and then some are kind of the technology and representing realistically your lighting as close as possible to the sort of effect that you want. First of all, when you're in a view in Revit, it helps to be able to see the light sources. So in this view, I have actually shown the light source as colored cones. The way you do that is you go to the Visibility and Graphic Overrides menu, or you can type in VG if you are so inclined, and go down to the Lighting Fixtures section. And down here it's the light source. You can turn that on and off. I'll turn it off, and you'll see all the light sources disappear. If I turn it back on again, I can also control the color here of the lines that are represented. I have them as a lovely magenta color, but of course you can do whatever happens to work well with your particular view, and you can override the line weight if you absolutely have to. Although I will mention that does tend to get a little dark on your screen. Anyway, so that's kind of the first thing. Now, when you talk about how you want to kind of design the lighting, it really helps to be able to actually see where the lights land on the floor. Now, the default value for these are kind of the regular old garden variety downlights that come with Revit, has a cone of light that comes out of it. And if I go here to Edit Type, and scroll down, there's a length for that symbol, like the actual cone. And you can change that number here. I'll change it to 8 feet, hit apply, and see how all the light sources jump up. Well, you can't really see how they are spreading out on the floor unless you get a view like this. So we need to come and change this to 12 feet. That's how high my ceilings are. And hit OK. And now what you can see is there's kind of an overlap pattern in my floor plan. Okay. Now let me take a look real quickly at my ceiling plan, just so you can get a sense of what it looks like. And this ceiling plan view, I have also gone to the Visibility and Graphic Overrides and displayed the light source cones. And you can see here that right now the cones are happen to have a nice overlap with each other, so that one cone is spaced such that it overlaps with the next one. Well, there's two things that you kind of need to understand when you're laying out this lighting to get this nice even floor lighting effect. First of all, you need to understand what the spacing ratio is for a downlight. And then you also want to, and obviously space the light fixtures, the luminaires, to that spacing ratio. But then you can modify the light source, the actual dimension and angle of the light source, to match whatever your situation is. Now, in this case, I think I went with a 0.5 spacing ratio, which means that whatever your ceiling height is, the light fixtures should be spaced half of that distance to achieve even downlighting on the floor. And of course, there are manufacturers that make different spacing ratio luminaires. But anyway, to control the dimension of the light cone, again, you go back into this Edit Type menu, and you can come down here and you can take a look at the some of the data about the fixture. The biggest one are these two, the spot and field angle and the beam angle. The beam angle is where a majority of the light is going to be. The spot angle is wider typically than the beam angle, and that is kind of the spill light. So you can choose to have a very precise light by having a very narrow separation between these two. And of course you can choose a number. I'll just change this to 25 and 30 and hit apply, and what you'll see is now my inner cone, which is the beam, the brightest part of the light source, is much narrower. There's a much smaller overlap here. So of course I want to undo that, and let's see, what did I have it at? I think 50 and 45. Okay. And hit apply here, and what you'll see is that you get a nice overlap. Now, obviously, I have already looked at the geometry of my space to figure out that that angle is going to work for me, and what this should give me is a fairly even illumination on the floor that will represent the light distribution. Now, while I'm in this menu, there are a few other things that we can take a look at just as effort to improve our lighting. One, the tilt angle. You can angle this particular light source. Right now, 90 degrees means it's facing right down. And of course, that is a downlight. If something is going horribly wrong and the light isn't landing where you think it should, this is a good number to check. Make sure it's set at 90. The other thing is down here under color. You'll want to go to the color menu and choose something like fluorescent daylight. I'll choose a warm white here and show you how different the color gets when you change it to fluorescent daylight. You might say, but this isn't a fluorescent daylight, it's actually probably an LED light source. But when you render this, fluorescent daylight looks the best. So obviously that's something you'll want to make sure you fix. The other thing is the initial intensity. We can measure the initial intensity in lumens, by luminous flux, lumens, which is much better than kind of going by wattage. Wattage is, of course, old school in that it's based on incandescent lighting standards. We want to go by luminous flux. So if you do actually have product data, you can change this number to, 1100 for, say, a 100 watt incandescent equivalent. Of course, LEDs are going to give you that number when you look at the light fixture. Okay. Anyway, changing all of these will affect the rendering. And I'll just click apply and OK. So let's take a look at the rendering. And we'll go here. I believe I have one that has just downlights in it. Oh yes, lovely. This brings up another point that I'd like to make, which is that when you are testing your rendering, and I'll call up my little rendering dialog box here, it is very important, I feel, to do rendering tests on your computer when you're trying to fix lighting, because you really need to see if the lighting is working correctly. And I'll just show you the settings here that are good for doing that. Obviously, a draft is really good. You can turn on a render region, which is basically a small box that you can define in your view. The advantage of doing this is I can say select just an area with a few lights, and this will render much more quickly than the entire screen. When you're checking electric lighting, of course, you want to make sure it's set to artificial only, and I use interior artificial only, and that kind of balances the rendering. Anyway, the other thing, which we'll talk about later, is turning on and off artificial lights. You can use this menu to turn off any lights that are not in your view. You might say, well, can't I just hide those lights? Absolutely, you can, although sometimes we want the geometry in here. This is a quick way to turn them on and off and also dim. Anyway, when you click render, what you'll see is that the computer is going to take some time to figure out how the rendering is going to look, but almost instantly you can see I'm getting a little preview. I'm going to stop the rendering's already done. I was going to stop it, but it's too quick for me. You can see that I'm already getting just a little bit of a preview of how my lighting is working. It's a little blotchy because of the low quality setting, the rendering setting. But I can come in here and I'll adjust this so that it's a little brighter. Okay. And I'm just basically trying to see, are the lights landing where I expect them to? And in fact, that's the pattern that I was expecting. Now, another thing that we often see as a problem is that your recessed cans in the perspective views, when you render them, they sometimes don't look like they're lighting up. Nothing is more annoying than a recessed can that's not kind of glowing in the ceiling. In reality, because of the varied construction of these fixtures, what you'll see as glowing can be different. An LED kind of lensed fixture, you're going to see a glowing lens, whereas a more traditional recessed can, you're going to see kind of a hole in the ceiling with a glow coming out of it. That's the reflector. So anyway, either way, let's take a look at the light fixture itself. I'm going to double click on it to open it up. And the problem is that if you look at this fixture, here's my light source definition. Of course, it's visible in the component view. It's an angle that we saw before. If you get the properties of the light source angle light fixture, this one, if you look at the light source, it's not landing on the inside of the can. There's actually no way that you could get light onto the inside of the can. So one trick that I like to do is create a glowing material and paint the inside of this fixture a glowing material. Now, you can, the easiest place to do that is right here in the fixture. And you can do it any number of ways. You can assign a parameter to a surface if you can affect the surface. Or you can just go and create the material and use the paint bucket. Let's go over to the Manage tab here, Manage ribbon, and go to the Materials library. I'll show you how to create a nice new rendered glowing material. Now there is usually a glowing material that's called like light fixture or light source. In this case, let's just create a new material. And what I do, I give it a new name first so that I remember what it is, and I can't tell you how many times I forget to do that. And I'll call it Can Glow, I guess. It's not a very clever name, but anyway, and Can Glow, I'll make it the glass class here if you're keeping track of that. I always check this Use Render Appearance under the Graphics tab, so that way in the non-rendered view I can see if there's any change or not. Maybe while we paint it, I'm going to give it a different color just so I can see if it's actually successfully painting those different colors. So I've got my preview of the material here. The simplest thing you can do is just click the self-illumination button, and it will open up the menu here. You can choose how bright you want the material to be. This is, of course, going to be dependent on how the rendering looks overall and how many of these fixtures you have, and so it's quite complicated, but LED panel is probably a good value to choose at first. You can see how I get a little funky glow here, and you could even choose a color if you want to get some kind of effect, you know, like an LED kind of variation. But anyway, probably it's fine just as is. So click Apply and OK. And hopefully, if all goes well, when I go to the Modify tab, I can use my paint bucket. I can choose my material. One little bit of advice here, as you move through the view here trying to paint a different surface, sometimes this light fixture, light source is a little annoying. So I'm going to go to my Visibility and Graphic Overrides, and I'm just going to turn off the light source. Okay, it's not usual, but again, you want to kind of make do as you can. You can see how the inside changed to be blue. The big thing here is you want to make sure not to paint the entire fixture. A lot of people will, if there's a trim ring, they will set up a parametric trim ring color later on. But you can see here how I used the I am sure many of you will find that super annoying, so you can go back to the Manage ribbon and go to Materials and change it to use the Render Appearance. Okay. The only problem is now it's hard to see that it was applied. Anyway, save the document and load it into your project, and you should see a nice glowing can. So you can see here that the cans are now glowing on the inside. I didn't apply any material to the trim ring. And off in the distance you can see some other recessed fixtures that are a different component, and they are not glowing. So obviously I'd want to use that material, that same material on these fixtures. Okay, and that's probably a good reason to use a parameter, and then I can choose the materials here in the main model. So anyway, there you go. Downlighting is done. Now, another thing that we are often called to do is aiming a lighting on a painting. Here, let me go here to this view where I have hung a painting on the wall, and I used some surface-mounted adjustable spotlights from Urco, I believe, or these might be the default ones in the project, I can't remember. that are available to Revit. And you can see here I've used the same cone light source that I used in the other luminaire. And when you go to the family of this light source, and if you're experiencing the problem of, hey, wait, I don't have a cone light source in my luminaire, this is very common with models from Revit City. Just come in here, select the light source, and choose light source definition. There are a number of different shapes that the light can come out of. So this may create a glowing area of that shape, depending on the geometry of the fixture. In this case, I don't believe we'll see anything other than the light source. But then you can come and choose a shape. This is the one here, this spotlight, is the one that has the angular distribution. If I choose, say, this light fixture, it will just glow from that shape. Same with this circle. It will glow omnidirectional. This one is basically a half hemisphere, so it can only glow going down. This one is an IES file. So you can change any of these light sources to use IES files, which is really nice if you are trying to get a realistic sense of a project by using actual fixtures. Okay, anyway, that's how you create this fixture, but I actually don't want to change anything because I think the fixture was working. Okay, for us the trick is finding a view where you can rotate these into the correct position. Now we've already seen that you can change the tilt angle, and I'll come in here and into the properties of this light fixture just as a refresher and show you that this fixture has a tilt angle which is adjustable down here. I'm not quite sure why they're all in a different order than the other one. Everything else is very similar. There's an initial color and all that that you'll want to change. But here's where you can set the angle. The optimum angle in reality is 30 degrees off of the vertical. That's kind of ideal. Now I have tilted this light fixture in, so I've actually done a little bit of math to try and figure out the ideal angle of the light, but 30 degrees you can absolutely set it within the parameters of the light fixture. That gets you the right angle vertically, and let me take a look at a section to show you what I mean. So here's the section view, and you can see here that it's got the angle. I've drawn it off of the vertical, off the ceiling, I mean, and you can see that the light source has the visible, the inner cone and the light bit of spread on it. Obviously, the light source that you choose, or the luminaire, is going to have its own definition for spread. So you'll want to make sure that whatever you're representing graphically here in the rendering is somewhat vaguely related to what you're planning to use in real life. So one of the critical things to aim lights is you need to get the view where you can see them and kind of rotate them logically. Now the tilt angle you cannot change graphically. You have to change it in the parameters of the light fixture, at least this light fixture. But the rotation you can change in reflected ceiling plan. Obviously you need to be having the light visible in reflected ceiling plan. And then you just use the good old rotate command, which even knows to rotate it in the center. I usually grab it by the middle of the beam. And then you see how I can see the painting. I try to kind of shoot just a little bit to one side of the center with the light sources. And I find that that gives me a little bit of a spill over. Yeah, this one probably could use a little bit more. Again, use the center of the beam. But I'm really looking at the painting to see if I'm covering it. Now, the other thing is you might be saying, depending on what object you're trying to light, if it's too low, you may have trouble seeing it in reflected ceiling plan. This is where you have to come and change the view range of your reflected ceiling plan. Again, I'm in ceiling plan. I have nothing selected. I can click on this view range. Normally a ceiling plan, the cut plane is at about 7 feet, so you may not see any furnishings or other elements. If I change this to, say, 2'6", which is quite low, and apply, and OK, you see what happens is now I am not seeing the painting as sliced through anymore. Whereas if I change the cut plane height back up to 4'6", that's allowing it to actually cut right through the painting rather than seeing it above or below the view of the camera. So anyway, that's a really good way to aim lighting for spotlighting on various types of objects. Okay, now let's talk about wall washing. Wall washing is like downlighting. It comes in many forms, of course, but I'm going to show you the recessed can variety. And the default downlight / wall washer that comes with Revit is kind of notoriously not great. What you want is a nice even wall wash on the back wall. If you go and edit the family of that wall washer, what you'll discover, in fact, I can't remember if I've changed this already or not, but you may see something that looks suspiciously kind of, I don't know, pear-like. This is an IES file, okay? And if I click on it, it will tell me what the IES file is, and I believe this is one of the default ones that comes with Revit. You can, of course, browse and choose a different one when you go to the parameters of this particular downlighter value. It needs to match whatever you're using in the project. Now that I think of it, I may be using this one here. It does look like I've already changed that. Anyway, the IES file that goes with this, you can browse and you'll find that actually Revit comes with a number of IES files. They are all cleverly labeled, so it's very hard to figure out. This is clearly an A19 and an A21, but I can't tell you much more about it. So if you're looking for a high degree of precision, absolutely look for a real one. And what you'll see, the light source definition height is such that this light source, there's a chance it could get cut off. So what I have done is I've actually moved the light source down and angled it up ever so slightly so that I can get a better distribution on the wall. Okay? And this light source, again, the shape of these, you'll learn to recognize them as you look at more IES files. But again, you can move the light source definition. Let's go to the right interior elevation of the light source. The definition of a light fixture that's recessed has this reference plane here for the light source, and that's what you're going to have to modify. That's where the light source is. If you need to move it up and down, it may be locked, or in this case, it's actually tied to the reference plane where the fixture is actually mounted, where it came from. Anyway, what you can see in this fixture, these lights are all facing this back wall, and I'm going for as even lighting as possible from top to bottom. So if you can achieve it, and this is a pretty high ceiling in here, so it's a little tough with these standard lights from Revit, but if you can achieve it with those, great. If not, that's when you really want to go and find an IES file from a reputable manufacturer, one that I strongly recommend, partly because the luminaires are probably the highest quality luminaires that you're going to see, is Edison Price. They have IES files on their website, and the luminaires in the real world are very nice, so I would recommend using those. Anyway, you can see here I've got a nice glow to the fixtures, and I'm getting a pretty even wall wash. In fact, if you look at the side wall, you can start to see the kind of cone of light that is coming off of the light fixture, and that's a good indicator that we're getting up really high. In fact, that's probably higher than reality. What you don't want to see is too much glow on the ceiling, because that's you faked it too much. Okay. In this case, I think I might have lowered that fixture just a little bit too much. Now let's talk about creating a glowing material. And the biggest thing for creating glowing material for a larger object is you absolutely want to create a custom material. I'm going to go into here. I've created one from that I've called _glass frosted. And again, I mentioned before that I use the render appearance. Not always, because sometimes I want some clarity as to whether or not I've actually painted the thing. This was a conceptual mass, and I've used a parameter, I think, to paint it, so I can change it pretty easily. Anyway, when you go to the Render Appearance tab, what I did is I used the Materials library that comes with Revit. If you click this, replace this asset. The asset is basically in your model. There's kind of a I don't know, collection of properties that are all connected together, and they are called an asset. And in fact, this is what it's called, luminous-cream. You can access the Autodesk library right here. I always use the Appearance library because that's meant for kind of rendering purposes. Under Glass, let's take a look at Glass. And this is my asset browser. And there's a number of properties that you can kind of hunt for. But let's go and scroll down. And I believe there's a number of different luminous ones. Translucent blue. These are just kind of default ones, but they are awfully nice. Just double click on it to apply it to your material. The big thing is if you have multiple rendered materials that are going to be similar, so like I've got this is basically a white frosted glass, make sure if you want to make a new one that's, say, blue, that you duplicate the original asset. And what you'll see, the asset name gets a little 1 appended to it. And that allows you to change this color without changing the original material. So if I created a new material from this one and I made it blue, for example, come back. I could now change the color to be, you guessed it, blue. Okay, apply. So you can see here that I'm getting a nice white kind of cream-colored frosting here, and if I go to the blue pre-made color, you should see a nice rendered blue color. By the way, if you're going to be using different shapes, glass, if you want something larger or smaller, choose an object which makes sense for your particular project. And I strongly recommend, if your computer can handle it, to enlarge this image. What you'll see, if you're like my computer, you can probably hear my fan going in the background having a complete. So here's the rendered view of the weird sculpture. It's a little bright for my tastes, and I think I would probably end up trying to put a texture on this glowing material. Another trick is that you can paint just one surface of this sculpture, make the rest of it something translucent like glass. That can also get nice effects, although sometimes you get some weird leakage. And this is just a saved rendered view. And you can see I'm starting to build up quite a few different views. Here was the wall wash view. And there are a number of other ones that I have on here. For example, I had these wall sconces working in this particular view. This brings up one of the things that you see a lot in Revit fixtures. This funny shape is the shadow from this light source. You can see how this is obviously a lot bolder than I need it to be. It's really washing out this particular spot. And you might say, how do I get rid of that and get rid of the glowing, the sort of giant ball of fire? One thing that you could consider doing, first of all, render this with these off. If I go to the wall wash view, you see how they're not even in there. And then take, say, the view from Revit where these fixtures are on. You could even turn off this light fixture, so that it's not emitting light, and just make, say, this cone, this jelly jar shape glow, or if there's geometry inside this fixture, which I'm not entirely sure there is, but if there was, you could make something glow inside this, as if there was a lamp inside of a glass glowing jar. And then Photoshop the two together. This light fixture will absolutely always make a shadow in this type of configuration, because the housing is going to create that shadow. But I think it's much less dramatic when you have all the lights on. So Photoshop will be your friend. Render it without it, and try a glowing material. That often works better than having the light fixture on. As a reminder, to turn that light fixture off in the rendering, call up the rendering dialog box, click on artificial lights, figure out where the light is that you're looking at. These are sconces. And then I can control them as a group. I've grouped these together, but you can also control them individually. One other use for a glowing material that I particularly like is to use it as a ceiling washer. I have a lowered ceiling here, and I can paint the top of this ceiling any material that I want, and I could paint that a glowing material. Sometimes it's a little bit much, but sometimes you can get a nice ceiling wash out of it. So those glowing materials, there's a number of different functions. Even, say, a niche, like a recessed niche, you could try to paint the top of that arch or divide the surface and paint just a small piece of it, and you could mimic niche lighting pretty effectively. Again, these are hard things to do and to get at the view where you can paint it. The other thing is making an exit sign that actually lights up is always an annoyance in my mind. They don't by default light up, but you can paint the EXIT letters with a unique color, or if it's set up that way, you can actually configure the parameters of that. Anyway, the other thing that I wanted to talk about is something called studio lights. Now, studio lights are these big floating balls here in the room, and these are from the Revit library. They're really handy for just kind of filling a space with a little bit of light. If I click on one of these and choose Edit Type, what you'll see, these can float at any height that you want. You can make the symbol any size that you want, but you can change either the default height or the individual height. But then if you come down here, they have the usual lighting properties. You can change the color temperature and the light output. These are really great if you basically just don't have time to get all the lighting design in, but you want something to render a little more fully. This will fill in the space. Now, one trick that I like to use, this is a special studio light, but I've modified the family, and I've called it a different name so I don't mess up the original, modified the studio light family so that it is a spotlight, the one with the field and beam angles and tilt angles. The reason that I did that is so that in this project, I could create a spotlight on a different effect. Probably it would make sense to have some geometry in here that would, like a light fixture that would be throwing that in reality. But in truth, I just wanted to create a spotlight on the door. You can see how in this room it is just a general dim glow in the room, except for this one really bright spotlight. And sometimes you just need to highlight an element, but you don't want it to glow. And this is definitely one way to change it. By the way, if you use a glowing material for recessed cans, you do have to be aware that in a view where the cans are turned off, you need to go and actually turn off the material. And you see how in this view I've turned off everything except basically a spotlight and those hanging studio lights. Let me go over here and show you this view. I've turned all those off. You have to remember that if you're planning to render that view, go beforehand, go to your materials library, and take a look at that rendered glowing material, wherever that is. I forget which one, maybe the one called glowing. What you'll need to do is go and uncheck self-illumination. And that turns off the glowing material. And that way you won't get any weird bright spots for lights that are off or a ceiling glow that you don't want. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about is balancing your lighting in a room. And you can see in this room I've got a lot of different light fixtures. I've got some glowing materials. I've got some wall-mounted sconces. I've even got a decal on the wall that I can make self-illuminated. When you balance lighting, you're basically, this is where you're kind of fine-tuning your lighting design. Early on in your lighting design, you want to figure out, what your general strategies are going to be in the room. Are you going to have downlighting, wall washing, spotlighting, decorative sconces, that sort of thing? those are your kind of your layering of lighting. But then if we go here to the rendering dialog box, this is where under the artificial lights grouping, we can start to really dim different light sources. What I like to do, I make a new group. If you just click new group, you can give it a name. I like to put all of my lights into different groups. So for example, this guy, I can move it to my new light, new light group, and okay, and I can now dim or even turn off this entire grouping. If I, for example, with the downlights, if I wanted to turn them off, I just type in 0, hit enter, and you see how it changes all of the recessed downlights to 0. Again, like I mentioned, if there is a glowing material on those, you want to be absolutely certain you remember to turn that off. But sometimes I just dim them down to some smaller percentage, say 0.2 or 0.1, and then you'd expect to see the glow. Okay. Same with the adjustable spots, the sconces. Each of these you can tune them up and down depending on how what kind of effect you want. What I like to do is make some changes and, like I mentioned, render on the computer using a draft setting. And I'll click render here, and I'll probably jump ahead in the video to show you the completed product, but it shouldn't take more than a minute or so to get a sense of what the lighting is going to look like, at least in a draft setting. And you can see here, this is obviously very pixelated, but I'm getting a spotlight on my little friend here. I'm getting some glow from these fixtures. You know, this is okay, perfectly fine. And what you can do, if you want to do several of these, you can take this view, right now it's my unbalanced view, and I can duplicate it. And when you create the new one, just be sure you rename it for whatever you want the lighting effect to be. And this is very much akin to a saved scene in dimming terminology. The preset dimming scenes are really a great way to kind of leverage the lighting that's installed in your project to get a number of different effects. So for example, I've got a few that I've kind of ready made here. You know, here's essentially what we were just looking at. This one is a little more on the downlighting, and I fiddled with the material of this to get a little less brightness and a little more reflectivity. I could also focus on more wall washing by tuning down the other light sources. And of course, I've got all these other strange things that I've got going on here. Again, you want to take a look at each layer and decide how much of that layer you want to create different effects. So that's it in a nutshell. You can take a Revit model and really improve the lighting in a big way just by using a number of different subtle techniques, including changing the light source direction, the light source definition, the angle of the beam spreads on the light source, using glowing materials in different ways, and finally balancing the whole kit and caboodle so that you come up with a presentation that is dramatic.